It's just a joke, don't be so dramatic, Ashley said, smiling as if she had done me a favor, and that was the exact moment I realized I was no longer a guest at my own son's wedding, but something far less welcome. I arrived 15 minutes early, the way I always do, dressed in a navy blue silk dress I had tailored 2 weeks prior, the kind of dress you wear when you believe you belong in the front row of a family milestone, not somewhere off to the side. The venue was everything Daniel had dreamed of, white roses climbing over wooden arches, soft music floating through the warm afternoon air, the kind of place where every detail whispers elegance. I paused at the entrance, taking it in, letting myself feel proud for just a second, because I had helped make this day possible, quietly, without needing recognition. Then I looked down at the seating chart. My name wasn't where I expected it to be. Not at the family table. Not even near it. Instead, there was a small handwritten card taped to a metal trash can near the catering station. Margaret Collins. I stared at it longer than I should have, long enough for the letters to stop looking like my name and start feeling like a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. Ashley walked up beside me in her perfect white gown, holding a glass of champagne like she had nothing in the world to worry about. She glanced at the trash can, then at me, and gave a small laugh. It's just a joke, don't be so dramatic. Around us, a couple of guests chuckled politely, unsure whether to join in or look away. I felt every eye in that moment, even the ones pretending not to look. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask why. I didn't give her the reaction she was waiting for. Instead, I smiled. A small, controlled smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals. Then I walked past her, into the venue, as if nothing had happened. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, but my steps remained steady. Inside, everything was arranged perfectly, tables set with fine china, candles placed just right, the soft hum of conversation building as guests found their seats. I moved through it all like I belonged, even though I had just been told, in the most public way possible, that I didn't. I found an empty chair near the back and sat down, smoothing my dress over my knees. From there, I could see the aisle, the altar, the place where my son would soon stand and promise his life to a woman who had just reduced his mother to a punchline. I folded my hands in my lap and breathed slowly. This wasn't the first time Ashley had drawn a line and placed me on the wrong side of it. It had started subtly, decisions made without me, conversations that stopped when I entered the room, plans I only heard about after they were already finalized. Daniel had changed too, though he would never admit it. He smiled less when he looked at me. He hesitated before answering simple questions. And now this. A trash can with my name on it. A joke, she said. I let my eyes drift back toward the entrance where the seating chart stood, where that metal bin still waited with my name taped to it like a label on something disposable. For a brief moment, I considered walking out. Just leaving, getting into my car, and driving home without another word. But I didn't. Instead, I reached into my purse and felt the edge of the envelope I had placed there earlier that morning, something I had prepared without fully knowing why. I hadn't planned for this exact moment, but I had sensed something was coming. Something final. I kept my hand there for a second, then let it rest back in my lap. Across the room, Ashley laughed again, louder this time, drawing attention the way she always did. I watched her, really watched her, not as a mother trying to accept her son's wife, but as someone finally seeing the full picture come into focus. This wasn't about a seat. It wasn't about a joke. It was about control. And as the music shifted and guests began to settle, I realized something else just as clearly. I might have been placed next to a trash can today, but I was not the one being discarded. I remained seated long after everyone else had found their place, watching the room settle into a version of order that did not include me, and it was in that stillness that the past began to arrange itself in my mind, piece by piece, until what once felt like small, forgettable moments now formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. It had not started with the wedding. It had started months earlier, maybe even a year, in ways so quiet they were easy to dismiss at the time. I remembered the afternoon Ashley told me they had already chosen the venue. I had offered to help, to visit a few places together, to make a day of it the way families often do, but she had smiled politely and said everything was already handled. Daniel stood beside her, nodding, avoiding my eyes just long enough for me to notice. I told myself it was normal. Young couples want independence. That is what I said out loud. What I did not say was how quickly I had been moved from being included to being informed. Then there was the dress fitting. I found out about it through a distant cousin who assumed I had been there. I had not. When I asked Daniel about it later, he hesitated, then said it was a small, last-minute thing. His voice was softer than usual, careful, as if he were trying not to disturb something fragile. I let it go. I let all of it go. Each time, I chose silence over conflict, understanding over confrontation. I told myself that love sometimes means stepping back. But stepping back slowly became stepping aside, and stepping aside became being left out entirely. Even the guest list had been finalized without me. I had suggested inviting a few longtime family friends, people who had watched Daniel grow up, people who would have been genuinely happy to celebrate this day. Ashley listened, nodded, and then did something else entirely. Those names never appeared on the final list. Instead, there were people I did not recognize, faces that filled the room now, laughing, taking photos, raising glasses to a future that somehow did not include the past that built it. I shifted slightly in my chair, the fabric of my dress brushing softly against my skin, grounding me in the present. Across the room, Daniel stood near the altar, adjusting his tie, smiling as guests approached him with congratulations. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who would run into the kitchen after school, dropping his backpack on the floor, asking what was for dinner before even saying hello. That boy had always reached for me without hesitation. This man, standing under a canopy of white flowers, seemed unsure of where to place his hands, his gaze, even his loyalty. Ashley moved beside him, placing her hand lightly on his arm, guiding him, positioning him, as if he were part of the arrangement rather than the center of it. She leaned in to say something, and he laughed, the sound carrying just far enough for me to hear but not understand. It was a practiced laugh, one I had heard before in recent months, a laugh that came too quickly, too easily, as if it were expected. I looked down at my hands again, noticing how still they were, how calm I appeared even to myself. Inside, something had shifted, not broken, not shattered, but clarified. The envelope in my purse no longer felt like a precaution. It felt like timing. I had prepared it after a quiet conversation with my attorney 2 weeks ago, a conversation I had not planned but somehow needed. At the time, I told myself it was just to review a few documents, to make sure everything was in order, to protect what I had built over a lifetime of careful decisions. Now, sitting at the back of my son's wedding, with my name still taped to a trash can near the catering station, I understood that it was more than that. It was a boundary I had not yet enforced. The music softened, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin, and guests turned their attention toward the aisle. I followed their gaze, lifting my chin slightly, allowing myself to take in the moment as it unfolded. This was supposed to be a day of union, of families coming together, of respect and acknowledgement. Instead, it had become something else entirely. And as I sat there, unnoticed but no longer unaware, I made a decision that felt as quiet and steady as everything else I had done that day. I would not raise my voice. I would not create a scene. But I would not leave things as they were. Not this time. The music began with a soft rise of strings, gentle and deliberate, and everyone stood at once as if guided by the same invisible signal, chairs shifting, conversations dissolving into silence, and I rose. With them, smoothing my hands over my dress again, not out of habit this time, but to remind myself that I was still composed, still present, still in control of what came next. The aisle stretched out in front of me, lined with white petals and quiet expectation, and for a moment, I allowed myself to remember another aisle, years ago, when I walked slowly beside my husband, holding Daniel's small hand as he looked up at us with that same mixture of excitement and uncertainty I now saw on his face. Back then, everything felt simple. Family meant something clear. It meant standing beside each other, not placing one another at a distance disguised as humor. A slight movement near the entrance caught my attention, and I turned just enough to see Ashley's bridesmaids adjusting their dresses, whispering to each other with small smiles that never quite reached their eyes. One of them glanced in my direction, then leaned closer to another, and I did not need to hear the words to understand the tone. It was the same tone I had heard earlier, wrapped in politeness, softened by laughter, but unmistakably dismissive. I shifted my gaze forward again, letting the moment pass without reaction. The ceremony began, the officiant speaking in a warm, practiced voice about love, commitment, and the joining of families, and I listened carefully, not because I believed every word, but because I wanted to measure the distance between what was being said and what was actually happening. When Daniel repeated his vows, his voice was steady, but there was a pause before certain words, a hesitation so slight most people would not notice. I noticed. I always noticed. Ashley's voice, when it was her turn, carried clearly across the space, confident, certain, each promise delivered with the kind of ease that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. I watched her closely, not with anger, not even with resentment, but with a clarity I had not allowed myself before. This was not someone who had accidentally crossed a line. This was someone who had drawn the line herself and invited others to watch. As the ceremony continued, my hand moved again toward my purse, resting lightly against it, feeling the shape of the envelope inside. It was thicker than a simple letter, its edges firm, its presence undeniable. I remembered the morning I sealed it, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, reading through each page one last time. I had not been upset then. Not angry. Just certain. That same certainty settled over me now, quiet but unwavering. When the officiant asked if anyone had reason to object, there was a brief, almost ceremonial pause, a moment designed for drama but rarely used, and for a fraction of a second, the room seemed to hold its breath. I did not speak. I did not move. This was not the moment for words. This was not the stage for what needed to be done. The ceremony concluded with applause, light and cheerful, as if nothing beneath the surface had shifted, and guests began to sit again, conversations returning in low waves of sound. I remained standing for a second longer than necessary, then took my seat once more, my eyes drifting back toward the entrance where the trash can still stood, unchanged, unbothered, a silent reminder placed exactly where it had been intended. But something about it no longer held the same weight. It was no longer a symbol of where I had been placed. It was a marker of where they had chosen to stand. And as I reached into my purse and finally slid the envelope into my hand, keeping it low, hidden from view, I understood that what happened next would not need an audience to be effective. It would not need raised voices or public confrontation. It would only need timing. And patience had always been something I knew how to keep. The ceremony ended with a gentle swell of music and a round of applause that felt lighter than it should have, as if everyone was eager to move on to the celebration without examining what had quietly taken place beneath the surface, and I followed the crowd as they began to transition toward the reception area, walking at the same steady pace I had maintained all afternoon, neither rushed nor hesitant, simply present in a way that did not invite attention but did not shrink from it either. The sun had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across the outdoor space where tables had been arranged in careful symmetry, each one set with polished silverware and folded linen napkins that spoke of planning, expense, and intention, all of which I recognized intimately. Because I had helped fund it without ever being asked how I wished to be included. I paused near the edge of the reception area, just long enough to take in the layout, and there it was again, my name, this time printed neatly on a place card at a small table positioned near the catering entrance, close enough to the kitchen doors that I could hear the clatter of dishes being prepared, far enough from the main floor that I would not appear in most photographs. I picked up the card between my fingers, studying it for a moment as if it might reveal something new, but it said exactly what it needed to say without a single extra word. Margaret Collins. No title. No acknowledgement. Just a name placed where it would be least noticed. I set it back down carefully and took my seat, aligning the chair just slightly so I could see the center of the room without turning my head too much, a small adjustment that allowed me to observe without being observed. Guests filled the space quickly, laughter rising in gentle waves, glasses clinking, conversations overlapping in a way that created the illusion of warmth and unity. From where I sat, I could see Daniel and Ashley making their way from table to table, accepting congratulations, posing for photos, smiling in a rhythm that felt almost rehearsed. When they reached my table, Ashley slowed just enough to acknowledge me with a brief glance, her expression unchanged, composed, as if nothing earlier had been worth remembering. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, his posture confident in a way that felt unfamiliar to me, and for a brief second, his eyes met mine. There was something there, not quite guilt, not quite discomfort, but something unspoken that passed between us and then disappeared as quickly as it came. He smiled, a polite, practiced smile, and said, "I am glad you made it, Mom," as if my presence had been uncertain, as if this day had not been built, in part, by everything I had given over the years. I returned the smile, matching its tone, neither warmer nor colder, simply equal. "Of course," I said, my voice steady, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Ashley added, "We hope you are comfortable," the words light, almost kind, but placed in a way that suggested distance rather than inclusion. I nodded once, a small, controlled gesture, and they moved on, their attention already shifting to the next table, the next set of congratulations, the next photograph. I watched them go, noting the ease with which they transitioned from one interaction to another, never lingering long enough for anything real to settle in. A server approached my table, placing a glass of water in front of me, the condensation forming quickly in the warm air, and I wrapped my fingers around it briefly, grounding myself again in the present moment. The envelope remained in my other hand, partially concealed against the fabric of my dress, its presence steady, patient, waiting. I listened as the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, calling for attention, announcing the beginning of speeches, and guests turned their chairs toward the front, eager, attentive, ready to celebrate the story being told. I shifted slightly in my seat, aligning myself with the room, not because I needed to be part of the narrative being presented, but because I understood that timing would matter, that moments like this, when all eyes were directed in one place, created space elsewhere for decisions to unfold quietly, without interruption. As the first speaker began, sharing light-hearted memories and carefully chosen anecdotes, laughter rippled through the crowd, filling the gaps between words, reinforcing the image of a perfect day. I let the sound wash over me without reacting, my focus narrowing instead on the details that others overlooked, the way Ashley's smile tightened just slightly when she was not the center of attention, the way Daniel adjusted his posture when certain topics were mentioned, the subtle signals that revealed more than the speeches ever would. And in that measured observation, with the envelope resting steadily in my hand, I knew that what came next would not disrupt their celebration in the way they might expect, but it would change something far more permanent, something they had assumed would always remain within their control, and that assumption, more than anything else, was about to be corrected. The speeches continued, one blending into the next, each carefully polished, each filled with laughter that rose and fell on cue, and I listened without really hearing, my attention fixed instead on the rhythm of the room, the way people leaned forward at certain moments, the way they relaxed when something familiar was said, the way the entire event seemed to operate on an understanding that everything was exactly as it should be. A friend of Daniel's spoke first, recounting stories from college, stories that painted him as easygoing, loyal, dependable, and I did not disagree, but I noticed what was missing, the years before that, the quieter years, the ones that shaped who he became before anyone else had the chance to define him. Those years belonged to me, and yet they were absent, as if they had never existed. I shifted my gaze toward the head table where Daniel and Ashley sat side by side, their hands occasionally touching, their expressions carefully maintained, and I wondered if he noticed the omissions, if he felt the absence of something that could not be replaced by anecdotes and applause. Ashley's turn came sooner than I expected, and when she stood, the room responded immediately, attention sharpening, voices quieting, anticipation settling in like a held breath. She began with gratitude, thanking everyone for being there, thanking her family, her friends, and then, with a slight pause, she turned her attention toward Daniel's side, her tone softening just enough to suggest sincerity. And of course, we are grateful for everyone who supported us along the way, she said, her eyes sweeping across the room without settling on any one person for too long. When her gaze passed over me, it did not stop. It did not need to. The message was clear in its absence. There was no mention of the financial help, no acknowledgement of the countless details I had quietly handled, no recognition of the years that led to this moment. It was not an oversight. It was a choice. I felt it then, not as a sharp pain, but as a final confirmation of something I had already begun to understand. This was not about forgetting. This was about rewriting. The applause came quickly after she finished, filling the space with approval, sealing her version of the story in a way that made it seem complete. I waited until the sound faded, until people began to shift in their seats again, reaching for their glasses, turning back to their conversations, and then I moved. It was a small movement, almost unnoticeable, my hand slipping into my purse, retrieving my phone with a calm precision that matched everything else I had done that day. I did not look around. I did not hesitate. I simply unlocked the screen and opened the message I had prepared earlier, the one addressed to a contact saved under a name that did not draw attention, a name that represented a service rather than a person. My thumb hovered for a second, not because I was unsure, but because I understood the weight of what a single action could set in motion. Around me, the reception continued, laughter rising again, music beginning to play softly in the background as servers moved between tables, refilling glasses, clearing plates, maintaining the illusion of seamless celebration. I pressed send. There was no sound, no visible change, nothing that would signal to anyone nearby that something had just shifted beneath the surface of the event. I placed the phone back into my purse and folded my hands in my lap once more, returning to the stillness that had carried me this far. Across the room, Ashley leaned in to speak with one of her bridesmaids, her smile unchanged, her posture relaxed, and Daniel laughed again at something someone said, his voice blending into the general hum of the reception. Everything looked the same. Everything felt the same. And yet, I knew with quiet certainty that it was not. The envelope remained in my hand, its edges pressing gently against my palm, a reminder that the message I had just sent was only the beginning, not the conclusion. I lifted my glass of water and took a small sip, the coolness steady, grounding, and as I set it back down, I allowed myself one final glance toward the entrance, toward the place where my name had been placed earlier, toward the detail that had revealed more than anyone intended. It no longer felt like an insult. It felt like a signal. And I had finally responded to it. The change did not announce itself with noise or interruption, it arrived quietly, almost politely, the way consequences often do when they have been prepared in advance, and for several minutes nothing appeared different at all. The music continued, conversations overlapped, glasses were raised, and the illusion of celebration held its shape as if nothing beneath it had shifted, but I noticed the first sign in the smallest of details, a man in a dark suit approaching the event coordinator near the edge of the reception, his posture formal, his expression controlled, and the way she leaned in to listen, her smile fading just slightly as he spoke. I did not need to hear the words to understand their meaning. Timing had always been precise when handled correctly. The coordinator straightened, nodded once, then glanced toward the head table where Ashley and Daniel sat, her eyes lingering for just a moment longer than usual before she began to move in their direction. I remained where I was, my hands folded, my posture unchanged, allowing the scene to unfold without interference. At the head table, Ashley was mid-conversation, her laughter bright, her attention fixed on the people closest to her, but as the coordinator reached her side and bent slightly to speak, that laughter paused, not abruptly, but enough for the shift to register. Ashley's expression held for a second, then adjusted, her smile tightening in a way that would not be noticed by most, but it was there, subtle, controlled, and real. Daniel turned his head, listening as well, his brows drawing together just slightly, the first visible crack in the ease he had been maintaining all afternoon. The coordinator spoke quietly, professionally, her tone measured, and whatever she said did not resolve quickly. Ashley's posture changed, her shoulders lifting just a fraction, her hand lowering from the glass she had been holding, her attention no longer on the guests around her but on the information being delivered. I watched without moving, my gaze steady, my breathing even, as the moment expanded from a private exchange into something that could no longer be contained entirely at their table. Ashley stood, smoothing her dress, her smile returning, but it did not reach her eyes this time. She said something to Daniel, something brief, and he nodded, though his expression remained uncertain, his confidence slipping just enough to be visible. They stepped away from the table together, following the coordinator toward the side of the venue, away from the center of attention but not entirely out of sight. A few guests noticed, their conversations pausing for a second before resuming, curiosity flickering but not yet fully formed. The music continued, slightly louder now, as if to fill the space where attention might drift, and servers moved more quickly between tables, maintaining the rhythm of service, ensuring that the event did not lose its flow. I reached for my glass again, lifting it slowly, taking a measured sip, the cool water steady against the warmth of the afternoon, and as I set it down, I allowed my gaze to follow Ashley and Daniel just enough to confirm what I already knew. This was the beginning. Not a scene, not a confrontation, but a shift in control. They spoke with the coordinator for several minutes, Ashley gesturing once, then again, her movements controlled but more frequent now, her composure working harder to maintain itself. Daniel listened, occasionally asking something, his posture no longer relaxed, his stance slightly angled as if trying to understand something that had not been explained to him before. Eventually, Ashley turned, scanning the room briefly, her eyes moving across the tables, across the guests, and for a fraction of a second, they passed over me. She did not stop. She did not acknowledge. But she had begun to look. And that, more than anything else, told me that the balance had shifted. I did not smile. I did not react. I simply remained as I had been all day, quiet, composed, present, as the structure they had built so carefully began to adjust itself around a reality they had not planned for, one that did not need to raise its voice to be heard. The distance between them and the rest of the room grew more noticeable with each passing second, not because they moved farther away, but because something in their posture no longer matched the ease of the celebration around them, and I could see it clearly now, the way Ashley's shoulders remained slightly raised even when she tried to relax them, the way Daniel kept glancing back toward the tables as if checking whether anyone had noticed, and of course, some had, though no one yet understood what they were seeing. Conversations continued, but they had begun to shift in tone, softer in places, sharper in others, curiosity threading its way quietly through the crowd like something just beneath the surface. I remained still, my gaze steady but not fixed, allowing myself to observe without becoming part of the observation, because this was not a moment that required attention from me, it required patience. The coordinator spoke again, this time with a second person beside her, someone holding a tablet, pointing briefly at the screen before turning it toward Ashley and Daniel, and even from a distance, I could see the change more clearly now. Ashley leaned in, her expression tightening further, her lips pressing together for a fraction of a second before she adjusted them into something resembling composure. Daniel's reaction was different. He did not hide it as well. His brows pulled together, his mouth opening slightly as if to ask a question he had not expected to need to ask, and when he spoke, it was slower, more deliberate, the tone of someone trying to understand something that had already been decided. The music shifted again, transitioning into something more upbeat, an attempt to guide the energy of the room forward, to keep the celebration moving, but the timing felt slightly off now, not enough to stop the event, but enough to make it feel less seamless than it had been before. A few guests closer to the head table began to turn their chairs slightly, subtle adjustments that allowed them to see more without appearing obvious, and I noticed how quickly attention can change direction when something no longer fits the expected pattern. I lifted my glass again, more out of habit than need, and let it rest lightly against my fingertips, the cool surface grounding me as I continued to watch the shift unfold. Ashley spoke, her hand moving once in a controlled gesture, then again, slightly sharper this time, her voice still low but no longer entirely calm. The coordinator responded with the same measured professionalism, her posture steady, her tone unchanged, and the person beside her tapped the screen once more, as if confirming something that could not be altered with explanation alone. Daniel ran a hand briefly along the back of his neck, a gesture I recognized from years ago, one he used when he felt uncertain but did not want to show it, and for a moment, I saw that same boy again, not the one from the aisle, but the one who used to look at me when he needed guidance. But he did not look at me now. He looked at Ashley. He waited for her reaction, her direction, her decision. And she gave it, quickly, quietly, a nod that carried more weight than any words spoken so far. They turned back toward the room together, their steps measured, their expressions adjusted, but something had shifted too far to return completely to what it had been. As they walked back toward the head table, the conversations nearest them paused just a fraction longer than before, eyes lifting, then lowering again, the kind of attention that pretends not to exist while absorbing everything. Ashley reached her seat first, smoothing her dress once more, her smile returning, but it was thinner now, more precise, as if it required effort to hold it in place. Daniel followed, sitting beside her, his posture more rigid, his gaze moving across the room in a way that suggested he was seeing it differently now, not just as a celebration, but as something that could change without warning. I did not move. I did not look away. I simply remained where I had been placed, at the edge of the room, near the space they had chosen for me, knowing that what had begun quietly would not need to become loud to be understood. It only needed to continue, exactly as it was, until there was nothing left to ignore. The room did not fall silent, but it changed in a way that was far more telling, the kind of shift that does not interrupt the music or stop the laughter, yet quietly rearranges where attention rests, and I could feel it moving now, table by table, glance by glance, as if something invisible had begun to ripple outward from the head table where Ashley and Daniel had returned, carrying with it a question no one had asked out loud. Ashley reached for her glass again, lifting it with steady fingers, but she did not drink, she only held it, her eyes scanning the room with a precision that had not been there earlier, as if she were measuring reactions, calculating what had been noticed and what had not. Daniel leaned slightly toward her, speaking in a low voice, his words brief, his expression still unsettled, and when she responded, she did not turn fully toward him, her gaze remaining outward, her answer controlled, almost dismissive, as if she needed him to follow rather than understand. I watched the exchange without moving, my posture unchanged, my hands still folded in my lap, the envelope resting quietly against my palm, its presence no longer a question but a certainty. A server approached the head table, speaking softly, and this time both Ashley and Daniel responded at once, their attention sharp, their tone no longer casual. The server nodded, then stepped back, moving quickly toward the coordinator again, and within moments, I noticed small adjustments begin to take place across the reception. A table near the center paused mid-service, plates held for a second longer than usual before being placed down, a brief hesitation that would go unnoticed by most but stood out to anyone paying attention. Another server changed direction, moving toward the entrance rather than the kitchen, as if following a new instruction that had not been part of the original plan. The music continued, but it felt slightly louder now, as if it were trying to fill something that had opened in the atmosphere, a gap between what was expected and what was beginning to happen. I shifted my gaze toward the far side of the venue, where a small group of staff had gathered near a side door, their conversation quiet but focused, their movements efficient, not rushed, but deliberate in a way that suggested they were responding to something specific rather than routine. Ashley stood again, this time more quickly, her chair moving back with a sharper sound against the ground, and although she smiled immediately afterward, the motion had already drawn attention. A few heads turned, then more, curiosity now less subtle, more direct, though still wrapped in politeness. She walked toward the coordinator with a measured pace, her posture straight, her expression composed, but the control required to maintain it was becoming more visible with each step. Daniel followed a moment later, not as closely this time, his pace slightly slower, as if he were trying to process what was unfolding rather than simply react to it. I could see it clearly now, the difference between them, the way Ashley moved to manage the situation, to contain it, while Daniel moved to understand it, to find footing in something that no longer felt stable. The coordinator spoke again, her tone consistent, her gestures minimal, and the person with the tablet remained beside her, occasionally glancing down, then back up, confirming details that did not change. Ashley's response came with a slight shake of her head, a controlled disagreement, followed by a brief pause that lasted just long enough to reveal that she did not have immediate control over what was being discussed. Daniel's shoulders lowered slightly, his posture shifting from confident to uncertain, and for the first time since the ceremony began, he looked around the room not as a host, but as someone searching for clarity. His gaze passed over several tables, then paused, just for a second, in my direction. This time, it lingered. Not long enough to create a scene, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for me to see the question in his eyes, the unspoken realization that something important had been set in motion without his awareness. I did not respond. I did not nod. I did not offer reassurance. I simply held his gaze for that brief moment, then allowed my eyes to move away, returning to the quiet observation that had guided me all afternoon. The envelope in my hand felt lighter now, not because its contents had changed, but because its purpose had already begun to unfold. Around us, the reception continued, laughter returning in small pockets, conversations resuming in careful tones, but the structure of the event had shifted in a way that could not be fully restored, not with music, not with smiles, not with practiced words. And as Ashley turned once more toward the coordinator, her voice lower now, her movements more restrained, I understood that the moment they had created for me earlier, the one they had dismissed as a joke, had quietly transformed into something else entirely, something they could not reposition, something they could not tape a name over and place out of sight, because this time, the change was not sitting at the edge of the room. It was moving through the center of it. There is a moment, just before everything becomes clear, when people begin to understand without being told, when the pieces that once felt separate quietly connect, and the room begins to carry a different kind of awareness, and I could feel that moment settling in now, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, like a truth that no longer needs to introduce itself. Ashley's voice had lowered again, her movements more contained, her gestures smaller, as if she were trying to minimize something that had already expanded beyond her reach, and the coordinator remained calm, unwavering, her presence now less like support and more like confirmation of something that had already been set into motion. Daniel stood slightly apart from them, not entirely removed, but no longer aligned in the same way, his posture uncertain, his attention divided between Ashley, the staff, and the room itself, as if he were finally seeing the event from a perspective that had been kept from him until now. I remained where I had been all afternoon, still seated at the edge, still composed, still quiet, but no longer invisible in the way they had intended. A few more guests had begun to notice, not just the movement at the head table, but the pattern of it, the repetition of quiet conversations, the return of staff to the same small group, the way Ashley no longer fully engaged with those around her, and instead remained focused on something that could not be resolved with a smile. The music continued, but it felt distant now, like a backdrop rather than the center, and conversations carried a different tone, softer, more observant, as if people were waiting for something to be explained without asking for it directly. Then it happened in the simplest way possible, not with an announcement, not with a raised voice, but with a change in placement. The coordinator stepped toward the head table again, this time not stopping beside Ashley, but moving slightly past her, addressing Daniel directly, her tone respectful, her words measured, and whatever she said caused him to straighten, his expression shifting from confusion to something more focused, more present. Ashley turned toward him immediately, her response quick, her tone controlled but sharper now, and for a brief second, the balance between them became visible in a way it had not been before. Daniel did not respond right away. He listened. He looked at the coordinator, then back at Ashley, and in that pause, something settled into place. Not anger, not confrontation, but understanding. He asked a question, his voice low, deliberate, and when the coordinator answered, she did not look at Ashley, she looked at him, and that choice alone changed the direction of the moment. Ashley's posture tightened, her hands still, her expression held carefully in place, but no longer guiding the situation. Daniel turned slightly, his gaze moving across the room once more, and this time when it found me, it did not pass quickly. It stayed. Long enough for recognition. Long enough for memory. Long enough for something unspoken to finally be acknowledged. I did not move. I did not react. I simply met his gaze with the same quiet steadiness I had carried all day, offering nothing but presence, nothing but truth that did not need to be explained. Around us, the reception continued, but the roles within it had shifted, not in title, not in name, but in understanding. The place they had given me, the message they had tried to send, no longer held the meaning they intended, because meaning does not stay fixed when reality changes. Ashley spoke again, but her voice did not carry the same certainty, her control no longer complete, her influence no longer unquestioned. Daniel listened, but this time, he did not follow immediately. He considered. He measured. And in that quiet hesitation, everything that had been carefully arranged began to lose its hold. I could feel it, not as a victory, not as a triumph, but as a correction, something returning to where it should have been all along, not through force, not through argument, but through simple, undeniable clarity. I lifted my hand slightly, not to call attention, not to interrupt, but to rest it gently against the envelope once more, the same envelope that had remained with me throughout the day, unchanged, unopened, yet already understood. It was never about revealing something dramatic. It was about allowing the truth to stand on its own, in the same room where they had tried to diminish it, in the same moment they had tried to define it as something small. And now, without a single raised voice, without a single scene, that truth had done exactly what it was meant to do. It had been seen.